Have you ever heard of the Egyptian princess who saved a baby floating in the Nile River? She was royalty, living in luxury, surrounded by gold, servants, and power. But one day she saw something that changed her life and changed the future of an entire nation. A tiny basket floated down the river. Inside was a crying Hebrew baby. Her father, the Pharaoh, had ordered that all Hebrew baby boys must be killed. But this princess didn't follow his command. She chose to disobey the king. She chose to save the child. She chose to raise him as her own. That baby would grow up to become Moses, the man who would later lead the Israelites out of slavery and into freedom. But what do we really know about the woman who saved him? Her name was Bithiah. She isn't often talked about in church or school. She appears briefly in the Bible, but her story has been kept in the shadows. Was she just a kind woman? Or did she know she was part of something much bigger? Some ancient writings say she turned away from Egypt's gods and followed the God of Israel. Others say she even left Egypt and joined the Israelites in the wilderness. So who was she really? A curious woman? A rebel? A believer? This is the untold story of Bithiah, the Egyptian princess who saved Moses and stood up for what was right, even when it meant going against her own people. Let's uncover the truth about the princess who helped change the world. Let's go back thousands of years to the land of ancient Egypt. Egypt was a powerful empire full of temples, pyramids, and kings known as pharaohs. It was a land of great wealth, but also a place of slavery and suffering for many people, especially the Hebrews, also known as the Israelites. The Hebrews were living in Egypt because of events that happened many years earlier. At first, they were treated well, but as time passed, they grew in number. The new Pharaoh began to fear them. He worried that if the Hebrews became too strong, they might rebel or join Egypt's enemies. So Pharaoh made them slaves. The Hebrews were forced to work long, hard hours building cities and working in the fields. Life was harsh, but even though they were mistreated, they continued to grow in number. This made Pharaoh even more afraid, so he did something cruel. He gave a terrifying order. Every Hebrew baby boy must be thrown into the Nile River and killed. This was a dark and painful time for the Hebrew people. Mothers cried, fathers felt hopeless, children were taken away. But even in the darkest times, a spark of hope can shine through. And that spark came through someone unexpected, an Egyptian princess. In the royal palace, Pharaoh's daughters lived lives of comfort and power. They had everything they wanted: beautiful clothes, servants, food, and education. Egyptian princesses were respected and had influence. But one princess would soon do something no one expected. She would break the rules, take a risk, and change the future of an entire nation. The name of this brave princess was Bithiah. Her name has a very special meaning. It means daughter of Yahweh. Yahweh is the Hebrew name for God. This is interesting because Bithiah was not a Hebrew. She was Egyptian, the daughter of Pharaoh himself. So why would an Egyptian princess have a name that connects her to the Hebrew God? This is part of the mystery surrounding Bithiah. She is not mentioned often in the Bible, but she appears in a small verse in the book of 1 Chronicles 4:18. That verse calls her Bithiah, the daughter of Pharaoh, and says she became part of the people of Judah. This hints that she may have left Egypt and joined the Hebrews. But that's not the only source that talks about her. In Jewish traditions, especially in the Midrash and Talmud, which are ancient Jewish writings, Bithiah is remembered with great honor. According to these writings, she was not just a princess, but a woman who believed in the God of Israel. Some stories say she refused to worship the Egyptian gods and chose to follow the Hebrew God instead. These writings even say that God rewarded her by letting her live and be remembered as one of the righteous women in history. In Christian tradition, Bithiah is also seen as someone special. Although her story is short in the Bible, her action, saving Moses, is a key part of the larger story of God's plan to free the Israelites from slavery. So, who was Bithiah? She was an Egyptian by birth, but possibly a Hebrew in heart. She was a royal daughter who stood for truth and compassion when it mattered most. One day, Bithiah went down to the Nile River with her servant girls. Maybe it was a regular day. Maybe she was going to bathe or pray. But on this day, she noticed something unusual, a small basket floating in the water. She asked her servants to bring the basket to her. When she opened it, she saw a baby crying. The Bible says, she had compassion on him. She knew right away that this was a Hebrew baby. She also knew what her father, the Pharaoh, had ordered. All Hebrew boys were to be killed. But in that moment, Bithiah made a brave choice. She chose life. She chose love. She chose to save this baby. This was a powerful act of defiance. She didn't have to say a word against her father. Her actions said it all. Instead of turning the baby in or ignoring him, she adopted him. She named him Moses, which means drawn out of the water. Some Jewish stories say this moment changed her forever. They say she began to believe in the God of Israel, even while living in Pharaoh's palace. She rejected the false gods of Egypt and accepted the one true God. Imagine the courage that took. She was risking her father's anger, her royal privileges, maybe even her life. But she didn't hesitate. She saw a child in danger, and she reached out in love. That simple, bold act would set the stage for one of the greatest stories in human history. After saving Moses, Bithiah took him into the palace and raised him as her own son. Imagine that. Moses, a Hebrew baby who was supposed to die, was now growing up in the royal courts of Egypt. He had access to the best teachers, the best schools, and the most powerful people in the land. And all of this was possible because Bithiah said yes to love instead of fear. As his adoptive mother, Bithiah played a big role in Moses' early life. She fed him, clothed him, and cared for him. She protected him from the dangers of palace politics. She helped him grow strong, wise, and confident. Even though he was raised as an Egyptian prince, Moses never forgot his true roots. Maybe that's because of Bithiah. Maybe she told him about his Hebrew identity. Maybe she taught him to respect his people's faith and their God. We don't know for sure, but it's possible she had a deep spiritual influence on him. Some people believe that Bithiah was the reason Moses had such a strong sense of justice. After all, she had stood up for what was right when no one else did. Maybe Moses learned from her example. Raising a child from a different culture in a royal home wasn't easy. There were probably whispers, judgment, and pressure. But Bithiah didn't back down. She gave Moses a future when he had none. She raised the leader who would one day stand before Pharaoh and demand freedom for his people. Without Bithiah, there would be no Moses. And without Moses, there would be no Exodus. Many people wonder, did Bithiah stay in Egypt forever? Or did she leave everything behind and follow the God of Israel? Some ancient Jewish writings, especially from the Midrash, say that Bithiah left Egypt during the Great Exodus. This was when Moses, now grown up, led the Hebrew people out of slavery and into freedom. According to these stories, Bithiah joined the Hebrews on their journey. She left behind her palace, her comfort, and her royal title to be with God's people. This is a powerful idea. Think about it. an Egyptian princess walking alongside former slaves through the desert. That's not something you hear every day. But the Midrash tells us she believed in the God of Israel so deeply that she gave up her old life to start a new one. In Jewish tradition, Bithiah is considered a righteous Gentile. That means she wasn't born into the Hebrew people, but she chose to follow their God and walk in his ways. In fact, she is one of the very few Egyptians remembered in a positive light. Her name is not a name of hate or cruelty. It's a name of honor. Her story teaches us something important. Faith isn't always about where you come from. Sometimes it's about the choices you make. Bithiah made a choice to follow truth, love, and righteousness, even if it meant turning her back on everything she knew. If you read the Bible closely, you'll notice that Bithiah isn't mentioned often. In fact, her name only shows up clearly in one verse, 1 Chronicles 4:18, and even there, it's just a short mention. But outside the Bible, in ancient Jewish writings like the Talmud and Midrash, her story grows much bigger. These writings tell us that Bithiah was loved by God for her kindness and courage. They say God gave her a special reward, eternal life and a place among his people. In some stories, Bithiah is compared to Abraham, who also left his homeland to follow God. That's a huge honor in Jewish tradition. One popular Jewish legend even says that Bithiah went down to the Nile River that day, not just to bathe, but because she was seeking spiritual cleansing. She wanted to wash herself from the false gods of Egypt. And when she found baby Moses, it was like an answer from heaven. Another legend says that because she saved Moses from the water, God later saved her by letting her survive the plagues of Egypt and go free with the Israelites. Unlike most Egyptians in the Bible, Bithiah is not remembered as an enemy. Her name isn't one people forget or fear, it's one they admire. She is one of the very few Egyptians honored in Jewish folklore. That makes her story even more special. Even though the Bible doesn't tell us much about her, these extra stories help us understand how powerful her actions really were, and how they were remembered by those who came after. Bithiah's story may be short, but her legacy is big. She is a symbol of courage, because she dared to go against her father, the most powerful man in Egypt. She's a symbol of compassion because she saved a helpless child. And she's a symbol of redemption because she chose a new path, even though it was hard and full of risk. She reminds us that doing the right thing often comes with a cost. She could have stayed silent. She could have looked the other way, but she didn't. She stepped forward and took action. In today's world, her story still speaks to us. It tells us that standing up for truth matters, even when it's not popular. It shows us that kindness can change the world, even when no one is watching. And it teaches us that where you come from doesn't define who you are. Your choices do. Bithiah may not be as famous as Moses, but without her, his story may never have happened. That makes her a hidden heroine of the Exodus, a woman whose quiet strength helped shape history. So who was Bithiah? She was a princess with power, but more importantly, she had heart. She saw a baby in need and chose to act with love. She went against her father's command. She broke the rules to do what was right, and she raised the man who would become one of the greatest leaders in history. Bithiah's name may only appear once in the Bible, but her actions echo through time. She reminds us that true greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's hidden. But it always leaves a mark. As we look back at her life, one thing is clear. Sometimes the quietest rebels have the loudest echoes in history. If you were inspired by Bithiah's courage and faith, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves hidden stories from sacred history. There are many more untold stories waiting to be discovered. And just like Bithiah, you never know how one act of kindness might change the world.